So these are familiar faces. I think, Susan, we hear more about and we see less, but we're so happy you're here with us. Um, and again, I've been in different parts of the organizational and individual journeys I've had a glimpse of what it took for each one of you to make the decisions you do and to enable. So with that, I'll actually start with Arnav, because Arnav, I mean, it's been like what, nearly a decade. Yes, nearly a decade. And BMGF also has gone through many strategic revisions at global and Indian levels. But let's start with that first question, that when you are a global foundation and you've got many things to navigate, from reputational risks to what are you really showing to the world with the decisions you make, how do you navigate global mandates and objectives to what the country needs and thereby select your partners?
First, thanks Nagma, and thanks Vidya for having us and being a partner with us in this journey over the last decade. I remember, like I think 2015, 16 is when we first met, and from there, we've learned so much working with you and from all of the partners and the entire team at Edelgive. Uh, I think specifically to answer your question, so we are a global foundation, but very much rooted in the countries in which we operate. Uh, the Gates Foundation is 23 years old, and 20 of which have been present in India. So India is almost the largest office of the Gates Foundation, and also the oldest office outside of pretty much Seattle. Of course, we've evolved in the last 20 years. This is the third decade of the Gates Foundation. So the first decade was primarily focused on HIV, which was the Avahan program, and some work on polio. The second decade was focused on strengthening state systems, primarily on health in UP and Bihar. Anand is here, who's played a big part in the early work in Bihar on health. And then we expanded our work from health to agriculture to sanitation to financial inclusion to gender, and also more recently education in this last decade. Now, this third decade is more, also in the sense of how country is evolving, how the Gates Foundation is evolving, focused on innovation, domestic innovation in India, domestic partnerships with, many of the philanthropic partners, and much more on domestic institution building. Uh, as we've evolved in the last 2 decades in India, also the priorities, have not changed so much, I would say, Nagma. But what we've tried to add into our programming is, focus on gender. So we didn't have a gender, specific division at the foundation. We were only looking at gender as part of our agriculture work, some part of our maternal health work. But then we tried to integrate gender in all of our investments. So every investment, we need to put a gender marker. How are you looking at this investment? We also added a much more focus on education. And again, on the theme of partnerships in India, we are working with a domestic Indian foundation on all of our education work, the Central Square Foundation. Um, and which is something as a strategy we've adopted, that how can we work with large Indian foundations, to further our impact. And of course, with Edelgive, we've done also many partnerships along that journey. So going back, I think we are a global organization, but rooted in the country, and all of the priorities that we are working on here, are pretty much rooted in the Indian context, right? So our work in UP and Bihar, or our work on, gender across almost all of the country now, to our work in sanitation, to the work on education, it's very much rooted in the country's priorities. So, to give an example, on gender, the India is kind of setting the strategy at a global level. So, the self-help group movement, which India has been focusing on, our entire work is anchored around women's economic empowerment, women's livelihoods, and a lot of work in Africa is actually learning from the work in India. Similarly, on health, which is focusing on strengthening the state systems, again that work is being piloted, taken back, packaged, and taken it to Africa on how can we learn from India. Focus on education very much again went down, something which started from India itself, because Kiran, who was the country director, then felt, as an evolution, we need to work on education. And then we narrowed, slightly on foundational learning numeracy, which is the age of 3 to 8. And that also became the country national policy as part of the national education policy in 2020. So again, very much rooted in that context. Globally, we set specific areas in which we want to operate. So we have 28 strategies, but then for some of that, narrowing or what we do at a country level is a balance of what we do, with the country and with the global. But again, it's not like, the agenda is set. I think in the last panel, Shagun was speaking that the agenda is set by the North, and then the offices, decide on what they can operate. I think it's a very collaborative effort. Of course, we have to allocate, our resources accordingly. But again, it's the countries which play a much, much larger role, and we see that evolving much more going forward.
So basically, you are agile to the requirement of the country, while you try to match it back to the global strategies that you have. That how much does that agility, um, how much effort does that agility take? Because it is a large institution.
So we have global strategies, but we also have an India strategy. For every global strategy, we have an India specific strategy that we operate on. So if it's a global education strategy, we have an India component. Again, we have a gender strategy, which is global. We have an India component. So the topmost goals might be very similar, but the pathways in some cases can be nuanced. Of course, it's a big. In the first panel, I think Siddharth spoke about, or I think Anand spoke about refreshes, review strategies. I think it's an effort, but it's again continuously on us who operate out of sitting in the country on how we can take those learnings, takes what's happening on the ground, hearing from everyone, and making sure that our strategy is actually speaking to the context on the ground versus happening in a one part of the world in Seattle, which is on the northwest, and then deciding what needs to happen in you know uh, in Bihar or in Patna or in specific household, right? That's an effort and it's a continuous evolution. We've tried to also take a lot of partners' inputs into our strategy, and also for every kind of review, we now have a board which also looks at can we get external inputs into strategies. Yeah, it's an evolving journey. It's an agility. It's adapting. It's also a balance, but something I think something which is very critical and we need to do. It takes a little bit more time, but I think that time investment is required and we need to invest that time.
Thank you very much. And I'll come to you, Gayatri. In an environment where foreign funding is what it is, and you are a very coveted funder, to put it simply. And Amit has been consistent over the last 10 years on the fact that he will be agile and he will, invest in different causes. And in fact, the first 5 years, I've seen him invest in things on gut feel. While he's always spoken about data centric approach, but also invest in gut feel and then decide on what to do. While all of this again is fantastic, and that is, you are the CEO of AT Chandra Foundation. And what does this mean for you as a practitioner? The pros and cons of representing someone who comes with this really good intent, logistically and operationally. What does it mean?
So I think you rightly said we used to operate much more on gut feel, but now have become far more strategic in terms of how we give. And I think as CEO, it's almost a responsibility that we stick to the strategies that we commit to. One of the things the team and I did 3 years ago, I would like to say, or maybe 2 years, we actually set out what it is, sorry, what is needed to become redundant, right? So if how do we solve a problem and then work backwards from that in terms of, therefore this is what the next 5 years will look like or 7 years will look like depending on the problem, therefore these are the budgets that we need year on year. And all of that was rooted in data. I think the agility comes from where we get newer data or newer perspectives. We have the ability to go back to our board and say, we went with this hypothesis, we were wrong. We actually need to change this number and this goal, and that will make us redundant. Or here's a new opportunity. I don't know, Maharashtra state government wants to do this with us. We had said we do this. So there's where the agility comes from. It doesn't stray from strategy. We allow only 20% of our budget to be on gut feel. So that's something that we report on.
So you also keep yourself accountable to how much flexibility you will give yourself. So there is high accountability on that kind of decision. How does that percolate from the founder right down to the team? It's not an easy one to pull off. And again, I say it because gut feel and emotion is a key part of how we all need to operate here.
Yeah.
So it's also something that has to be absolutely valued while making strategic decisions, and that's so counterintuitive if one just looks at it like that, but it is possible,
Yeah.
and we've seen you do it. So how do you manage it with that eclectic kind of a founder, and I call him eclectic with a lot of admiration,
Yeah.
and a team that is also trying to acclimatize itself to that.
I think that's why we've kept the 20% flexibility, right? If we were going to go with really strong guardrails on and we won't stray at all, it would have been 100% of our time and effort and money goes into this and nothing else. So we keep that flexibility. And like I said, even within our verticals, if there are new opportunities, if there are avenues that we can further our impact even faster than we thought that we would, we are able to go back to the board and say no. Or yes, we want to do XYZ. Um, I think a lot of the way that we've been functioning as a team has changed drastically. So, some of the aspects of our founders, not just Amit, but also Archana,
Oh
Anuj,
yes.
right? All three are completely different human beings. I mean, it's almost fun in our board meetings to watch them argue. Uh, I think we can sell tickets to people to watch that. Good fundraising strategy. Um, but it's being able to take the best of each of them and then take it back to them saying, but this is what we've committed to based on this. Sorry, I thought Poonam was raising her hand, saying that I have something to add. But it's being able to take the best of each of them because they also are such good friends that they're able to push themselves and therefore us.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. And I'll go to Susan first then. And Susan, you have been funding causes in India for decades. You have also been traveling to India at least twice a year, if I'm not mistaken, for decades. And what struck me so much about Yonja and you uh, is the fact that you seem to know some things about us better than us simply because of your vantage point. But we've seen you again try to do your best from a long distance, which is not easy. Like, you do have people here, you have partners here, but when you invest from there, when you give a grant from there, and you really want to do good by the grassroots, what are some of the real life challenges, and through the navigation of all of them, is there something you wish just vanished from the Indian ecosystem?
Wow, you're starting with the from the backside. I was actually preparing for another question, but that's not the problem. I think I was. I say what I like really about when working with you. What is so difficult when you are a small organization? We're really small. I think I have to do a disclosure here. Our granting is roughly around $1.1 million, $1.1 million per year for two countries, Turkey and India. So we are really a mosquito in the room. And still, we have really this high ambition to be an involved donor and an active donor. So how can you do that in those big markets? And I think that the only way we could survive actually, we focused very roughly from the beginning. We said we only are very, very strict on topics and beneficiaries, because only then we can gain a certain depth of understanding and be taken serious also by our partners here who have such a long experience. And the other thing is collaborations. And I think when you talk about challenges, I think, yes, of course, one big challenge is when you are living in Europe, you need to come here from time to time to touch reality. And I can tell you, I've been in development cooperation since the 90s. So I've been in many, many challenging environments. But for me, it's always, I have to come back from time to time and go to the rural parts also to do my reality check, because you keep forgetting. You keep forgetting what it means to walk 3 kilometers to, as an Angawadi worker with a small child and a baggage every morning to be on time. That was for me a revealing kind of eye-opener when I traveled in Rajasthan, I think it was. So I think that's the reality check we have to do. We cannot just sit in our homes. There is one thing donors, and a lot of donors, we do the mistake that we tend to stay in the cities. And that's not just an Indian thing. I saw that in Zambia recently. I was traveling there. It's interesting. I came from a very peripheral region, and I moved towards Lusaka. And as we moved to the city, we saw all these big development corporation signs going up. And I had come from a region where they really needed help. There was nobody. And it's a very simple, sometimes stupid thing. And sorry if I can be as blunt as we donors do. We want to be there in with the same. We have 2 days or 3 days, and we want to cover, I don't know, so many things. So we cannot travel 2 days to a difficult place. Now, do we how? Yeah, no, that's a challenge. And so many kind people have asked me during the break, can you come and visit us? And I have to say no, but I can say, because it's so far away and I have a lot of work at the headquarters also, but I can at least say, and that's another thing that has saved us, we have partners here in India, and we also have 2 people here in India by now. One we share with Edelgift, that can come and visit you. And I have full trust if they visit you, they are my eyes and ears also. But I find it still very saddening for me that I think sometimes, as we come from far away, we cannot give the time and respect and appreciation to all of our NGO partners, especially the ones that are really remote, just to show up, show our faces and say thank you, right? It's not about that they have to show me what all they do, but that just I can give the respect. So that's I'm not sure I have answered your question.
You have. Thank you. Okay. That's really beautiful. And from let's continue with the question that you had expected first, Susan. I mean, just one more thing, and then I'll come to you, journalist. Is like with these restrictions, then how do you maintain or how do you plan around the efficacy of your grant making? Because you also have a board and you also have to go back and again marrying what you see in the field and the limitations of what can be done with what is the agenda back home. How do you manage that?
I think one important word that has come up over the last 2 days is extremely important, is trust. I think we can have all the institutions and everything. If the trust is not there, you are very limited in what you can be doing. And I think one big asset I have is I have trust at home, at headquarters. We are a very small organization, and I have the full trust really of the board and the founders also. So that gives, of course, when I say something, they listen to me. And even if I say something, maybe it's out of the mission a bit, but I can kind of make a good argument. I mean, they're ex-McKinsey, some of them, so I have to really, really have a good argument also, but trust is there. So I think that's one thing. The focus I mentioned, collaborations are, we couldn't survive without collaborations. We were very lucky to meet Edelgift. We also have I think you're our most trusted and intense partner. But we also, I can say, have worked with DASRA a lot. So we have these 2 big institutions that helped us a lot overcome our limitations and learn a lot. And I think 2 things we would really like to do even more is address systemic problems. As a small funder alone, you have no chance. You have to be in a collaboration. And the other thing we would like to do more is actually help those that are, as I said, out of the city. And that's also for us not possible without partners like Edelgift.
No. Yeah. Thank you. And Janelle, I come to you. When we speak about MacArthur in Edelgift, I think there are some words we use, and one of the key words is how nimble you are and how open you are to actually looking at what is being planned for and then working around the processes that matter. And you are a large foundation by all measures. How is this nimbleness, executed by you? It's one thing to have it in principle, but also in practice. How does that get done?
Thank you, Nagma, and great to be here. It's a privilege. we've been big fans of It'll Give for sure. And of course, after we became partners on Grow, it's been a tremendous learning for us, for me personally as well. Um, I can't say that MacArthur is nimble. Being a large foundation, not as large as a few others, but I think within the foundation, if I look at it from within, we are always looking for ways to be more nimble, I would say. The last exhibit of our nimbleness, I would say, was in 2020, 2021, when COVID happened. And I think that's when a couple of US foundations, including MacArthur, um, took that step of going out to the market and raising money as a philanthropic foundation, which was unheard of at that time, uh, to actually, by not drawing money from our endowment because it was going against our overall financial principles, but at the same time responding to the situation at hand. And we raised that money by raising bonds from the market, and that's how we ended up funding COVID response and recovery in an equitable manner. Beyond that, I think something we call as the just imperative within the foundation, wherein we try to mainstream principles of social justice and letting go of that differential between being a grantee and being a funder. So we're also trying to move away from the term grantee, even though it's very, very deep rooted in our systems, but trying to create something which is very less differential between the partners. And that's where we're trying to let go of some of the bureaucracy within the foundation as well, in terms of relaxing the processes which we had to go. For instance, when COVID happened, we let go of written reports. So no one had to, I mean, if you were a COVID recovery initiative grantee or a partner, you were not required to report on our systems. You could just give a verbal report to the program officer and we will write it up for you, and we will write it up on the system, and that will definitely go to the board on what happened on the ground. And that's the kind of relaxation that we had made possible through the systems. But at the same time, recently, our first line of attack is generally general operating support. We have not done so much in India because of the regulations and other bits which all of us are very well known about. But for general operating support, we don't even now ask for applications. Within the MacArthur parlance, it's called Gen Ops No App. It's called, it's a thing which started back in 2022 as a pilot, and now it's become the norm, wherein the legal team has approved that, okay, if we decide that we are going to give a general operating support to any particular organization, if they are, aligning with the mission and vision of the foundation, we would not ask for application. We would just seek their legal documents, because that is something which allows us to stay true to the sense of the law and everything that we are required to do as a foundation as well. So those are the systems that we are trying to put so that we are able to respond, at the same time um, be empathetic to our partners on the ground, because it comes from a deep sense of humility. It's been talked about since morning, but I would like to underline that it's us who are sitting in our air conditioned offices and not going out in the field as usually as our partners are. And I would just respond to a question earlier in the previous conversation about why not 10,000 organization. Why not? Why can't organizations actually reach out to foundations like us? We're a very small team. I mean, on a programmatic side, it's just 2 people based out of New Delhi, uh, India Habitat Center, for the last 30 years. That's been the strength. We have never moved beyond 2 people in this country. We're trying to change that. But I think that capacity that acts like a limitation is the only barrier that we face. At the same time, we would not find many big foundations based out of small towns. So you would not find big foundations based out of Patna or Bhopal or Kanpur. Most of us are based in Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay. So I think those are the real challenges that we face, but these are also a function of our being philanthropies. So I'll just stop there.
No, you after you continue with if with all of this agility and humility, what are where does a non-negotiable come? Like there are some things that I know MacArthur will just not do. What are your non-negotiables?
So our non-negotiables are around the equity piece. So, for instance, since 2015, we have been operating in the climate solution space. The foundation has existed since 1994 in India, 70s globally, but in the climate program, when we did the so-called strategy refresh in 2020, we pivoted around equity. We that became a non-negotiable for us, that okay, if a climate solution is not working for people, it's not really a solution in that case. So if a climate solution wasn't people centric, so that's a non-negotiable we put as part of our strategy. Internally, as a foundation wide, what we call as a just imperative. So principles of social justice are non-negotiables for us. For instance, now we have incorporated a workplace misconduct declaration that we seek from every organization, not because of law, but because of our own urge to be true to the mission that we believe in. And that's where, if an organization is not treating its people properly internally, there have been complaints that they've not responded to it properly, we will go into details, and if we found that they did not respond to it nicely, we would not be able to make a grant to them. Not saying that their work is not important, it's just that the hygiene conditions are not being met within any partner of ours.
Thank you very much. It's very important that I bring attention to two, three things that are very special about this group. One is this group is not homogeneous in intent. They come from different intents, but there are commonalities that are very striking. Each one of the people who's sitting here really believes in ecosystem building, and in their ways have been doing that. Each one is a different size. Each one has a different reason for being, and that's what it makes it remarkable, that within the differences there is so much synergy. There's so much synergy in what is being said about keep trying to do the best by the grantees, trying to find those who need help, and trying to find people beyond our comfortable zones. And that's been consistent. And there are two, three little more trivia that I will talk about. But Gayatri, your foundation keeps reiterating the importance of good data. Okay, are there some times when good data emerges, but still it is important to make a different decision? And what are those reasons when you, in spite of data evidence, you would say, no, I see this data, but I refuse to fund this, or I see this data, but I will still fund it?
So data can be different types, right? Data could be that there's data and evidence to show that a problem exists and we need to fix it. Data could be that problem exists and we are the best to solve that problem. um, we could see all the positive data around the solution and yet not fund someone. To Janelle's point, if we don't believe that the organization has the right value systems, or that the way that they operate on the ground is actually very short term, and actually the long term impact of it is going to be worse. So it's digging into that data that matters, and digging into how the organization functions. The other way around, if the data actually says the opposite, we could still fund somebody because we take a leap of faith and we believe that they can actually change that data. And it could be not based on prior experience, but really based on the individual's intent and the way that they think about it, right? I mean, even if you think about Grow, we had not participated in something of this scale with the kind of money that we put in. We didn't have data to say that Edelgave is going to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z. But we took a leap of faith because we believed that values wise we are similar. What we're trying to prove for the ecosystem in terms of capacity building and the need for it, that intent was very strong. So it's not that we will only work if everything, all the ducks line up. There are leaps of faith that you do take.
It's again very important to tell you my personal experience with each one of them on the Grow Fund. And I'm glad Gayatri brought out that there was no evidence that Grow Fund can work. That was the beauty. There was no evidence that Grow will work. There was no precedence to any process. There was no reason for grow to happen. And I remember it was a 2-page note that Jirnel Motushi was there, and it was just a note that was circulated to all of them. And one of the highlights of my career is going to be how funders responded, because the good behavior that came was just phenomenal, and it needs to be celebrated. And we need to also understand that everybody who funds these collaboratives is not coming with the same heft, but they're coming with the same intention. So MacArthur just called up and said, suppose we support it, what are you going to do? And suddenly Edelgate was like on steroid. Like, you know, it was such a beautiful question to put. And we came back. The Gates Foundation, I mean, the first one who ever said, what would you do if, what does ecosystem mean to you? And I remember it was a half a paragraph, and then the conversation that went back and grow for them was like, okay, we talk about ecosystem, let's think about ecosystem and put money into it. And then I remember Susan calling up from Zurich and saying, why are we not here? It and like what you said, you have always been data back, but you heard about grow and you were like, no, we need to do it. So putting that, signing that check or putting that intention down and saying we are here, okay, comes also from that core understanding, Vivek, which is very important to highlight, that these are people who want to have 1,000 flowers bloom, but there are serious, real structural barriers to the gap between resource and access. And as an ecosystem, we have to make it work. So with that, Anna, one question quickly to you. What structurally would help build between this gap between resource from someone like you to access this work? Because now I know that the Gates Foundation is focusing highly on collaboratives, and the annual letter also urges for the rich to give and the sector to be able to take. What is the, if I have to quickly put, and I'll ask this question to everyone, what would be one or two structural interventions that are needed to make this move faster?
So I think first, in terms of whenever we are like partnering, uh, I think people is the most important thing. I think trust comes from people, transparency comes from people, having honest conversations and open conversation comes down back to people. So I think you're basically, if you're investing in an idea, you're investing in the person and in the people behind all of that, right? So that's been the most foundational philosophy. I think we believe because for having impact at scale, you need to get multiple people together. I think we don't necessarily believe in that, you know, if everyone goes together, we actually go far versus actually going fast. So the more far we can go and the more impact we can have, and doesn't need to be necessary also that, who is behind the impact. I think that's the last thing which is at least in our minds. I think the impact is more important, and that is the seminal thing. And for impact to happen in a country, as big as 1.4 billion people, we need many partnerships. We need many collaboratives. Each area, at least in which we operate, or even outside of the allied areas, we can do so much together versus doing, one single person. You need partnerships with government, partnerships with philanthropies, partnerships with implementing organizations. The intersectionality of all of that needs to work for each sector, for each problem to be solved. I think the Grow Fund is one great example. I remember in 2020, we also had the India COVID Response Fund with Give India, which also just started, basically like a conversation that COVID is around, we need to do something. And, by stroke of luck or people behind, I think everyone just came together. It became a $100 million plus fund, 100 plus philanthropies, 1 million plus people who also contributed to it. Many implementing orgs, were part of it. Many state government, central government played a role in it. So I think it's when you have a large ambition and you have, great people behind, I think the resources follow, at least is what, I've seen in the last few years. I think it's the power of that idea and making sure that we are having trusted conversation. In terms of process, I'll say having the right idea, the right people, the right process, the right tech, and thinking of scale and the right governance is most critical, because I think at all those levels, you need to look at specific points just to make it happen. And I think everyone needs to keep their own ego behind and think of the larger picture in terms of making the impact, versus thinking कि इसमें मेरा क्या है, उसमें उसका क्या है. I think इसमें सबका क्या है is more important than मेरा क्या है.
Thank yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, I mean, with regard specifically to a collaboration like Grow or also the education one, I think we as a really small donor have had the privilege to access it, although we were small, and I think that was thanks to our special relationships. And I think that is a hindering still for smaller funders to participate in large collaborations. Whether you can think about, is there a club of the smaller ones, right? Or how can you bring those in at which conditions? I think when I look at the NGO level, actually, where I see more and more actually a problem arising as we move to outwards of the city is really the capacity problem, the HR problem. And I don't know whether Grow, you looked at a specific group of organizations, but how can we actually overcome the challenge that, for example, M&D persons still simply cannot be found by many of these small organizations that like to access also our funding, and we often require that. So the capacity problem, the HR problem at the level of the NGOs, especially, are there solutions? And as a small organization also, are there simpler solutions, right? For example, for M&D that work for organizations that have few resources, and at the donor level, but also at the NGO level. Yeah.
I would just do a plus one to what Arnav said on people. I am a big believer in quality over quantity, and I feel everyone is an emotive being. We all have feelings, and how do we connect with each other? Because COVID threw us completely off. It was a realm of virtual reality, so to say, and everyone lost touch. And I think that's where uh, not all foundations will be able to fund 10,000 organizations, and that's where I think organizations like Edelgib do a great job uh, in terms of acting like a glue and bringing in models which work for everyone. I think that's where equitable distribution could also happen, but I think it still depends on one-to-one connection, one-to-one time, mixers, where trust gets built. And that's where in-person engagements are really, really important. I don't think we have figured out a way to do it systematically and structurally. Probably that's why they happen, because there's no structure to it. And that's my personal belief that it's we are all very emotional beings, and that's where we connect. Long-term partnerships will always be built on emotions and feelings, and never around governance or a method as such. But yes, there is a need for a method to bring those emotive beings together.
I honestly don't know what else I can add to three great answers. So I can say a plus one, plus one, plus one. um, I mean, I think for us, the individually as A.T. Chandra Foundation, similar to Susan, we're not a huge foundation. There's no way we could have accessed 100 NGOs directly, and therefore working as a collaborative with all of us coming together, I don't think there's a greater power than that, to be honest. For us, what's also important is the journey doesn't end there. What comes out of this? How do many more grow like organizations, which even whether we're a part of it or not, but not organizations, sorry, funds, how like, can we as an ecosystem start creating many more of
Yeah.
these?
I have a question, but I will ask only if one of you hasn't asked it. So let's see if you ask it. We are opening 4 questions, and whoever has them, yeah, okay. I had expected that, so I'm just going to reserve my question. Nobody asked, then I will ask that one question. Where is the team and the mics? Yeah.
Hello. Now it's on. I'm Gayatri from Healing Fields. really refreshing, this panel and the earlier panel. And it's also very encouraging to know, donors are getting very flexible, especially about failures. But my question is, typically donors, how do we change the way donors look at failures or look at long, there are organizations who look at transforming behaviors, which doesn't happen overnight. It's a long journey. And how do we get people to stand with us through those long journeys, right? That was one. The other question to you, Nagma, I think Grow has been great. It led 100 of us through a different trajectory. But how do we take it to the next level? How do we bring collaborations between these 100? Yeah. So that was the question.
Thank you. Like
Thank
part
you.
one is where, so
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये था, ये बहुत फंडर से भी आता है कि डेटा आपका कैसा है और आपका रिजल्ट कैसा है, जबकि हमारा काम है खासकर महिलाओं को अवेयर करना कि ना करना सीखो, जॉब रिपोर्ट करो, ठीक है, कोर्ट जाओ, और ये तो डेटा और बढ़ाता है, तो ये तो अपोजिट रिजल्ट होता है। और तो हमारे लिए बड़ा मुश्किल होता है कि अब ये सक्सेस स्टोरीज है या ये मुश्किल स्टोरीज है। हमारे लिए है क्योंकि हमें पता है कि जो 70 करोड़ महिलाएं हैं उनमें शायद ही कोई ऐसा हो कि जो किसी न किसी डिस्क्रिमिनेशन या वायलेंस से बचा हो। अगर वो सारी महिलाएं निकली तो मुझे लगता है कि बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाएगा। हम चाहते हैं कि वो ना करना वो सीखे और निकले, तो और ये भी इसके साथ में है कि फिर व्हाट विल बी द रिसोर्सेज का क्या होगा, फंडर्स हमें कैसे देखेंगे। So that is the
so I think what you're basically saying is where are the resources to address the data gap that is being asked for?
Yeah.
Is that the
Yeah, exactly.
that is the question. Okay, one more. There's this gentleman right at the back. Okay, mic not. Yeah.
Hi everyone. My name is Krishna and I work with Samarth. And Samarth has been is a partner of in like within the Grow space. And I should certainly say that it has been an enriching experience to be part of the whole space that got created through the whole Grow Fund. We are 160 of us, and we were able to bring everyone together in 3 different geographies and learn a lot. So thank you, like Edelgive, for that whole opportunity. Coming to my question, uh, collaboration is like I have kind of a two layered question. One is that collaborative space which we are kind of right now like discussing. Uh, what has worked for the 4 or maybe the 5 people sitting on this stage? Collaboration as a strategy or collaboration as a value? And what has worked in that space? And the second part of my question is, uh, working together is a learned behavior. Like you have to learn to work, like to work together. Could you share some learnings which you have picked up from working together? Because like we being a practitioner on ground, boots on the ground organization, we also collaborate with other boots on the ground organization.
Yep.
And this is a very interesting group of organizations who are from the donor world, and how do they collaborate and what, and can you please share that?
Thank you,
so
thank you.
much.
We'll just pause there because that's a lot of really good questions, and we need to give good answers. So, you want to start with answering Renu, and then
Sure.
Arnav, and we can all pick one question.
So I think, Renu, I can see a parallel to the question that you have with one of our grantee partners. So they work on child sexual abuse, right? So the more people report, it actually looks like they're doing worse, but it's good if children have the wherewithal and the ability to report crimes. For us, that is a good data point. So I think one, your donors need to really understand what you do and how, while numbers go up, it's a good thing. But I think secondly, maybe at some point in time, do like a survey among the constituents that you work with to understand overall are women feeling more empowered. So those will be more outcomes that you measure maybe once every 5 years through some third party research. And then the milestones that you report on are how women are coming forward much more and filing more cases, or getting the strength and the wherewithal to be able to take care of themselves. And I know we as donors do push for a lot of our NGOs to do these third party research studies, which we then obviously will fund if we ask you to do something. So, maybe talk to your donors about that as well.
I think her question was that how do we make this more of a sector practice? How do we get more funders to think of it like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe try to combine a little bit of both in terms of collaboration as a value is critical. That is why only collaboration, as a work practice will happen. So the value is very, very important, and when we certainly believe in collaboration internally, externally, getting to the place, to the auditorium was a collaboration. I think everything is, you have to collaborate for everything to have success. I think from a funders and from a partner's perspective, trying to blend both those questions, I think it's how do you look at scale and the bigger picture in all of it versus looking at the narrow and the short term. As more partners and funders and donors, and certainly like many of us have partnered on many of the things together, we've always tried to think of the long term and trying to align, how can we, 5 years, 10 years out, if we do this journey together, what it might lead to and what success we can have versus doing it independently. I think you need co-partners, you need co-partners in impact, you need co-travelers in this journey. And I think it's only when you're together you will get to that impact versus doing it individually. I mean, we work with about 200 plus partners in India. And I'm so happy, with Grow Fund, we've added 100 more, at least in my mind, right? So with 300 plus partners, I can say very proudly back to our team that we don't only work with 200, we actually work with 300. So Grow has, certainly been an exemplar in many of that. And I think one line, which I think Nagma has heard before, which I use from sometimes from a Hindi film is ki, uh, कभी कभी कुछ जीतने के लिए कुछ हारना भी पड़ता है एंड हारकर जीतने वाले को बाजीगर कहते हैं so in many cases for funders you need to drop many things in a collaborative when you're working and you need to कुछ कुछ चीजें हार जाओगे तभी आप बड़ा जीत पाओगे नहीं तो आप नहीं जीतोगे.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Can I also then say something? Okay. Um, yeah, I think obviously it's both, right? As I said, for us it's a needed strategy and also to tackle certain issues. But for us, definitely it's a value. It's a big value, and I think actually that Monogma we could even strengthen. I think the exchange amongst the donors that are in the collaboration, because we learn from each other, and of course in the process hopefully we also gain trust in each other, right? We build the trust by exchanging, and I think that can be intensified even, but definitely the value part is important. The question on failure I find very important, because I had noted that down also as a challenge, because we are obviously clear that impact which we all want to see only happens at a very late, sometimes a very late point, right? And typically also after the interventions. And failure, if you're in change programs, it's almost obvious that we will have some failure. How do we deal with it? I think for me what is difficult is I haven't seen, we always talk about failing fast. Honestly, I haven't seen that, or not. I think it's always very difficult to understand, is that now failure or is it just bad circumstances? There are so many things that can happen that boycott what you have been doing, come in between. So what is a failure? That's the first thing. And then I think for Jolyon, for us, it's very important, is there acceptance? I mean, can we agree, both sides, there are things that are not happening as they should? Do we kind of try to cover that up, or find a good explanation, or do we face it together, and then we try to adapt? For us, I think that's actually the more important thing to decide, do we go on, right? And I understand that needs trust from the NGO side towards Dalian, and that is very, very difficult to give that trust when you work with a donor the first time. And that's a challenge also we face, and we think a lot about how can we build the trust faster, so they really know they can be totally open with us. Honesty is very, very important. they can be open with us, we will not walk away. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you. The Janelle, and the final question. What have we learned? Like, what have you, yeah. What do we learn from these collaborative experiences that needs to also be put out to everyone who's here?
Yeah, and I think that responds to a couple of questions also. I was drawing an equation of, between collaboration and a couple of other driving factors. I was not good in calculus in the beginning, but this is something that happened just naturally over here. I feel that collaboration is inversely proportional to insecurity, inconvenience, and mistrust. So if we solve for these three things, if we bring people together and build that trust, and if we make it convenient, if we make it radically simple to collaborate, at the same time, if we can deal with their insecurities of, okay, the pie is growing, so I'll have something. If MacArthur is not there tomorrow, I'll still have 10 more funders coming into the space, and Edelgive will make sure that that happens. So if we deal with that insecurity, and if we make sure that trust is built and make it very, very convenient to collaborate, I think it'll happen organically. So that's where I'll pause. Yeah.
Okay. And with that, we come to the end of this panel, and it's been beautiful talking to all of you. Please give them a big round of applause.